Thanks for hanging out with me in this. And this is just it's my favorite thing to be able to explore this and to to connect with another who kind of shares a lot of the earnestness that seems to be how it moves in me and to get to have this time to play and explore. Thank you for doing this with me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it
Mm.
too.
Will you
Um,
say that again, please?
so, so one of the things that's been coming up and has come up in some of our sessions is this idea of parts wars and backlash in the system. And I'm not sure if we want to use non-dual concepts, but this idea of like there's things fighting against one another, and that kind of only exists in parts. Um,
Mm,
so I wanted to, see how that's evolved for you, how you've explored that, and insights there.
that's great. It brings me to where we always start with self or parts, just that basic discernment. And that's just the IFS language, right? In other systems, they'll call it beingness and content, or the sky and weather, or awareness and thoughts, feelings, and sensations. It's background and foreground, the discernment of the two. And then we get a sense of this background, this beingness. And this is when I love the movie. You've seen my movies page. That I think exactly. I put him on the top one. It's the very top movie. It's the Yes Man, right? Jim Carrey. The yes, 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 yes. Okay. So but if we really look at beingness, right, we find that it's not. There's not resistance there. It's kind of an openness and acceptance of what is. That's why some people say it's a loving what is. It's an acceptance. It's a welcoming. And that's why I love the yes, like Jim Carrey's, this was like parts doing it, but it was still delightful. But when coming from being this, it's a yes. And then, and so like when you say a parts war, tension between what's going on inside versus that discernment, that it's never from what we're calling this background, this beingness, that self is a yes, is an openness. It doesn't resist. So we start there, and then we contrast the beingness, the self, with the content, with the thoughts, feelings, sensations, which we label as parts in IFS. And what we find is that there's a little bit of a want there, a little bit of, the like the Buddhists will just say it's resistance. Like but in the IFS, it's like finding the sense of a want, a lack, a preference. But it's not a problem. We love that. We celebrate that. We celebrate our parts. This is life. We celebrate that. But we also see that, and again, just to make a point with that, tomorrow Sid wins $100 million, right? And like in the world of fulfillment, that's it. It's like, well, you can have everything you could ever want, you can have, but then we'll discover like a week later, it'll be like, okay, how do I hold on to this fulfillment? What do I do? The parts come up that are all, and so I don't usually use the word parts war. Sounds really intense, right? It's like but it's really like the drama of the parts, and it's like because often there's a polarity that comes up in the parts, especially when you have these shoulds and things, or you should do this and this. My life will be better if only I lose 10 pounds, if only I, got up every morning and did the running. And then you have another part that's like, what do you mean? You want me to get up at 6 a.m. and go running? I really just want to rest. Or I want to read in the morning. I want to peace, or I want to be with my girlfriend. And so there's just like the tension that's there. And I think sometimes the tension, and we just become aware of that. And it's just like, wow, there's a tension there. And then that's the whole game we've been playing in our groups. It's like these different ways of being with the parts. That's a really long beginning of an answer.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I find so so you mentioned at some point in another conversation sort of sneaky parts or parts that go unnoticed. And I think in my own experience where some of that um, parts war comes in was in not recognize was mistaking parts for self, like self-like parts that you talk about. And so one that has come up is a fixer healer type of part where you think, here's this experience, I should be open to it and just allow it, and I shouldn't be resisting. And then you kind of end up you kind of end up that's what I would call a parts war, because one part's saying I shouldn't be resisting, and one part is resisting, and there's an experience. And then that's where I've experienced sort of that backlash where there's a lot of tension, and you're kind of just gas and brake kind of feeling, and then you feel like you've lost.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's a good one, right? And why does it take so long for our systems to heal, right? Why does it take so long for we're exploring the sense of this yes that we are, that self is, and then what I want to suggest is one of the things that really freezes our systems, or what you're calling the parts war, which I'll often call in IFS. Sometimes we just talk about it as a polarity, the yes and the no, right? The brake and the accelerator. And one thing that where EIF is helpful, there's in a lot of the practices, including classic IFS, there's a sense of being intimate with the gas, and intimate with the brake. What we try to do is we do that zooming out. We often do it with our thumbs. We zoom out to be aware of the thumbs, be aware behind us. And the idea is to be able to be aware of both sides of the polarity, the yes and no, this parts war, to see it all. And then there's a sense of, and that's from being, that's from self. There's an awareness of, and then yeah, that's what we do.
Yeah. Um, I appreciate that answer. And I'd love to know how you think about intimacy, because when you say intimacy, and you usually do preface this with like, oh, now I gotta get intimate, which is very much like, and that comes online for me, where it's like, all right, fixer part, great, let's get intimate with both parts, or the both sides of the polarity here. How do Can you explain your experience, or how it comes up for other people, where you're actually becoming intimate by what feels like pulling or pulling back?
Mm, okay. First question is, who's being intimate with the part? And this is where we're kind of watchful of these superhero parts that are like these healer parts, these spiritual achiever parts that come in. It's like, hey, we can be intimate with this. I can be intimate with that contraction in my system. And great. And we notice those, and those become included as well. And then there's a sense of we're aware of this, that's aware, there's awareness of the parts. And let's just go with the sense of the polarity, the yes and the no, the brake and the gas. There's awareness of those. And this is where we're exploring this as an awareness practice, where there's not a sense of doing in that intimacy. Like, as we're aware of these two parts that are like, "Whoa," when we're aware of them, how far away are we from these parts? How intimate are we with them? Becomes the That's what becomes interesting to look at. How intimate are we? And this is where we've been playing with, like, the idea of the metaphor of like the infinite hot tub. And it's kind of like, as we start to recognize that as these parts arise, what are they arising in? That they're arising in, that beingness is here, whatever the flavor is. For some of us, we just got this presence. For others, it's an alive stillness. For others, it's a warmth, it's an acceptance, it's a love, it's a fullness. And so there's this sense that and once the system starts to realize that, and this kind of the second tipping point in effortless IFS, just as we start to recognize more and more that self is always here, okay, that beingness is always here. Then there's a sense of everything that arises, these two parts, that they're arising in it. And then I always ask this question in our dives: do the parts, can they recognize that they're not alone, that self is here? If they can just notice that, and how do they notice that? How do they feel that? And then we find, and then how does that work in your system? How does your system make sense of this? That you have these two parts, and you also have beings at the same time that we're aware of. And that's where we all come up with our different metaphors. That we had this beautiful one today of this. Well, it's a crystal, it's like a crystal cavern, and with a pool in it, and the parts are just coming in that. Often we use Rumi's guest house. Or for others, it's a dance floor or a stage, and the parts just come and they can get soaked in that, or they get to be seen and met and held. And that's the intimacy. And then what becomes fascinating, I'll say one more thing, is just what you're asking about, like what degree of intimacy, how intimate are we with these parts? And that's what we get to be aware of, because that's the organic thing. Because we all have these parts that some of them will be like there's real, you know, we all had experiences in our youth that are still, that most of us have, where there's still remnants of them. There's still remnants of fear. I mean, I have the craziest one you've ever heard. Like, I'm scared of ducks. What? You're scared of ducks? I'm scared of ducks. Because when I was like a foot tall, I'm feeding ducks, and like 100 ducks chase me. And I'm still like, and it's still crazy. Like now, I'm still scared of ducks. But that's what I'm saying. It doesn't have to be like, oh my God, a horrible, horrible thing happened. I was raped. It's a car accident. My parent died. My parent died. Anything, any contraction that's still here. And then what's interesting is to see how intimate we are with it. And they're protectors that they're parts of our system that won't allow it to get too close to it until everything, it takes time for all that to happen. And that's what we watch. That's what happens in time. Back to you.
So how do you think about I know you say EIFS kind of can blend with other practices that are maybe more effortful. How would you explain the difference there in trying to unburden by resting in that hot tub versus like the doer intimacy where it's like, oh, let me go start a dialogue with it, let me go journal about it, let me, try to nurture it, which has a much more, I'm going to do something.
Yeah. One, I love that. And that seems to be part of the art form of this, is to discover how we complement. And when, and it's all about our parts, right? It's all about what our system is yearning for, we just call them parts, but whenever there's lack, what is needed. And we want this to be like a birthday party for your parts. Like when you throw a birthday party for a kid, you want them to have everything they want. It's like a birthday party. You want them to have fulfillment. And so that's the interesting question. Like, what's going to help them find that? And just it seems to be the art of this, is that the way they complement each other. Because I absolutely adore classic IFS and somatic experiencing and kind of a number of different healing modalities, but how they complement each other. But where you got to be careful, because you mentioned the word backlash earlier, and I don't think I really responded to that. Or we have to be careful, and this is very core to classic IFS, is to be able to recognize when there is a part with an agenda that's kind of pushing it. Because when you have an achiever, when you have a part that's like, I really want something to change. Okay. What we usually get it kind of an equal and opposite reaction to it. Or it's like, what it's like when, let's say I'm coming to be with, let's say, for me, my grandfather was the one that he was just he just was so excited to see me. Anything about me, it would just be welcomed and celebrated. What that's like, in contrast to there have been other people in my life when I come to them, and there you can just feel the sense of something in Sid should change. Something isn't good enough. And you can just notice how we react to that. And it's like the same way with our parts. And the loveliness of self is that it's like my grandfather. It's like this, and it doesn't have the other. And so where it's so nice combining the other parts that are the other practices that have doership and agency focus on it is I want to suggest being mindful of kind of parts of us that have an agenda that are pushing.
Yeah, I think that's a great, a very helpful answer. The parts with an agenda, when you said that, I would like kind of lit for me, and I was like, oh, that that makes sense. And I think that's why I've had so much or experienced so much backlash in classic IFS, and you mentioned somatic experiencing and some of these other modalities, which are great. But when there's a strong doer fixer part with a strong agenda and often trying to make things go away, then you sort of get that backlash, and it feels very childlike or teen like the trope of like the teen fighting back, like stop trying to make me do things, stop trying to make me like you kind of thing. And that's kind of what it feels like happens when those, strong agenda, even though in a trying to be helpful context, come online.
Yes. I'd like to just clarify. This isn't a Sid thing. I mean, this is classic IF. This is Dick Schwartz. This is the heart of IFS, where one of our core questions when you're trained to be a facilitator in IFS, it's to ask, how do you feel towards that part? And when you're facilitating someone, how do you feel towards that part? The reason we ask that is then you get to find if there are parts that have an agenda that's like, oh, I don't like that. There's something needs to change. Something's wrong with that. Something's wrong here. And you recognize that in classic IFS, we ask those parts to step back so that it can be a clean space that we're working from. And so this is classic IFS here. And it's just the only difference is we don't, instead of asking them to step back, we include those parts, but it's the exact same thing.
Yeah, yeah. And I've played around in classic IFS with asking the parts to kind of step back, and I think I've had a little bit of a harder time than actually what we're doing here, which is kind of inviting those in. But I think that that just may be a personal thing. Um, but I want to go back. You mentioned Yes Men before, and
Yes,
I
yes, yes.
and I love that movie. I love Jim Carrey. Um, and I recently rewatched it for this interview. Uh, and I think the first time I saw it, like many years ago, I thought to myself, like, what would it be like to like say yes to everything to some extent, not anything extreme. Uh, and it's kind of interesting because like the conclusion I came to was like, oh, you could keep saying yes. It's just maybe the yeses will get harder. And then when you hit that no, that's kind of what the scary part is like when it keeps like leveling up in terms of the challenge. And I find that to be how
What's your
this,
favorite scene from the movie? That's like the movie. He kept doing it, and then they were like, I forget, like the tobacco, drink the Tabasco, and like they kept
right,
pushing it, right?
right, right. I mean, like, yeah, I mean, like he jumps off a bridge, or he's told to like all these ridiculous things, and he just keeps doing it. Um, but I actually do try to relate it back to the insight there was like I do find that when you open the doors here, like it does become a little bit more difficult, or the edges keep getting pushed out, and
Yes.
so how do you think about this at like this flooding kind of concept, or
Mm.
like now all this, maybe this big fear comes up, like, whoa, there's so many things flowing in. And I know we kind of want this to be effortless, like somewhat effortless and somewhat easeful. How do you kind of balance those things?
Mm. So as there's of surface levels of resistance of I don't want, I want the surface levels of, oh, I want to do, and there's a yes to, there's just a welcoming of that. The yes, there's an acceptance of what's here on the surface. Everything's just accepted. And it's like, okay, and then it just, then maybe, and some of those are protectors, right? Some of these are protectors, like, oh, I want to sleep in. Oh, I don't want to be with those people. That might, if I'm going to be with that group of folks or those old friends or something, it might trigger something in my system. Or if I have to do something fearful or professionally do it. But then it's like there's a yes to those. And just like you're saying, it kind of can get more difficult. It's like those, but those can be protectors, right? They can be protecting. And as those protectors are met like that, it can go like, okay, it can start getting closer to ultimately what it's protecting us from. These can be, I forget what you said, the flooding. It can be, what is it? And you mentioned this in the group today. It's like, what is it protecting us from being with, from feeling? What is it? If you're invited to give a speech to 100 people, like what's the fear that's there? If like this scares a lot of people, right? And it's like and you say, you say, yes, yes, of course, sure, I'll do that. And let's say you get up there and you just, it's, it doesn't go very well. And you're like, oh, I don't know what to say. And people are asking questions and then like, and then the critic comes up like, you're really a mess. Or remember those thoughts you had when you were 10 years old or 13 years old about yourself? See, they're true. They're true. Look what just happened. Look what everybody thought about us. And then it becomes really interesting. It's like, can there be a yes to that? Or is that I'm really pushing it. Does that become too much? The critic, those voices that say I'm a mess. I'm whatever the scary things inside ourselves are. It's like as they start to come up. Um, so there's that in watching how it goes, right? But then there's also we keep talking about the gentleness of this, that this just gets to be so gentle. And there's some wisdom in this. Because when we're not doing the doer, we're not doing the achiever, we're not pushing. It's like, okay, I got to do that speech today to 100 people, and then I've got to go like run 10 miles, and then I've got to go like on a blind date tonight, and it's like when we're doing it, there seems to be something that looks out. There seems to be a balance here, an equilibrium, like it just goes and the parts are brilliant, right? The parts know, like we don't do the Jim Carrey thing. We don't jump out of the plane. We hear the parts. There's a wisdom in the parts that say, hey man, if you want to go do that speech in front of 100 people, I'm going to have you practice it in front of some friends. I'm going to have you make sure you're comfortable doing this before you put yourself out there. It's like, okay. Um, it just I guess what I'm finding in my system is an organic thing with this. And it's tricky because we're used to, for some of us, like I went to law school, right? I was like I know this American way of you just do the just do it thing. This is different. This is moving differently. And so I'm not sure. I just went all over the place with your question, Eli. I'm not sure how I did. How are we doing?
Yeah, I think it answers the a little bit of like how to deal with things externally. I would kind of clarify, like, how do you think about internally? Like, what's our limit slash what's the capacity? Or is there infinite capacity when you're allowing everything?
Okay. So let me ask you something. This is a great question about capacity. This beingness and this is straight again, this is so much of this is from my mentor, Dick. I have three mentors. Dick Schwartz is one of them with IFS. And he'll say IFS that the self can't be diminished, it can't be hurt, it can't be tarnished, it can't be overwhelmed. And this is a big deal because so much of our game that we do is the discernment between self and parts, and just to get to know this stuff better and more intimately, and to get to know that it can't be overwhelmed. There's always we find qualities like causeless okayness that's always here. Okay, so that can't be overwhelmed, but we got all these parts, and the parts are not a problem. We got these aspects of us. We got, hey, some kid said some really mean things to me growing up, right? There's some harsh things, and sometimes when I hear certain things, or if I or if there's a sense of, gosh, I really screwed up, I might hear some of those. My critic might come in and say some of that stuff, and inside it might be very uncomfortable, and it might even touch, we call them exiles in IFS. It's just any kind of wound, anything that's still here, because that's the healing of the system. Anything that's held here, any contraction, any fear, and that's when we do have capacity. There are limits on this because it's organic. The welcoming everything, right? It's like, I'll just say just a moment more on this. Some of the things inside of us, they just love this welcoming, this care, as we get to find these qualities of beingness. It's just like soaking in a warm hot tub, a bathtub, or being loved by whomever that the Gaia loves us, or everything loves us. We're being seen as beautiful and okay. Then we have other aspects of us that still have the contraction, the fear. I can't do it right. It's like there's whatever the fears, whatever the grasping is, that's like, I gotta, it's, there are aspects of us that are like this, that don't receive it, that don't feel it. And they're protectors that are like, this is too much. We all have our capacities, and so much of the subtlety of this seems to be to recognize that capacity where it is right now, and it seems to be the art of it, as well as we let our systems heal. How are we doing? Am I getting it? Because you're asking like super deep stuff here, and I'm not sure. How are we doing? How am I doing? I'm trying.
Great, great. I think I'm still a little there's still a little bit of back and forth on that last one, of like there is infinite capacity, but also recognize our capacity. And I guess in practice, what does that look like? Because and I'll give like some of the context, like you said, there are parts or exiles that get excited when we open the gates, right? When we say, "Oh, hot tub's open," and they get excited and it says, "Oh, can I come?" And it's like, "Yep."
Mhm.
And can I come? Yes. Can I come? Yes. And and then maybe you hit this edge where it's like, oh wow, that like big stuff's coming, or like bigger stuff is coming, or bigger, and it's like, oh, you could say yes, and then like, so maybe I'll make it more pointed to, like, in your experience, if you're working, if you're sitting in the hot tub, and things are coming and things are coming, and it starts to get, the stakes get higher, how do you approach whether to keep saying yes or saying like not right now?
Oh, but I think we're always saying, be first for self always is, they're always got the yes, but then it's there's also a yes to the fear that comes up.
Mhm.
It's as we, again, the Dick Schwartz who founded this thing, it's such a treat to be around him, because he's gone from acceptance and welcoming to just loving his parts. And it's just what you can feel that. And as we, today in our group, we had someone was talking about, there was fascination with parts, being fascinated by it, and the welcoming. And it's as those things start to open, and we have these aspects of us that are contract. It's like, oh, I don't want to go speak to that group. It's scary. I don't want to go on a blind date. I don't, it's like there's a yes to that too. There's
Mhm.
equally a yes to it because the only thing that would want to override it would be like the spiritual achiever, which we love too. It's like, no, man, we want to open up into bliss. No, but we're being with
Mhm.
this one. And so that's that's the other side of the yes.
Yeah, it almost feels infinite there because it you keep going, but you're allowing sort of the body to dictate where you're going rather than some prior agenda.
Right. And we love, and we're yes at the agenda too, a part that's like, hey, this would be the optimal thing to do for healing and for
Right,
achieving
right,
and having a good life, right? It's like, oh wow, how wonderful. Thanks for that.
right. This all gets it all it's simple, but at the same time can feel confusing because it's like, you're like, oh, there's the achiever that wants to keep pushing past, and then there's the fear that keeps going, and you're saying yes to both instead of picking a side and going in one direction, which is, I think
Yeah.
it's really counterintuitive, or at least to, a lot of other approaches, or even just, let's say, like just a spiritual, like only approach that's just, pushing in that way. Like you got to move through the fear, right? You have to move past the fear. And then if only you can do that, things will open up, right? And then we're kind of
Yes.
saying something different here.
So this is the gift of the parts-based system. This is the gift of, for me, being just labeling our fear as a part. And all that's doing, again, is making it an object so that we can be aware of it by calling it a part, by knowing it as part. But then it becomes, then it gets to be such a beautiful thing of an intimacy with the fear, with the part, with an intimacy with it.
Hmm. Yeah. Why do you think we reject parts? Or what's driving that? Are
Oh,
they beliefs, for internalized beliefs from other people?
oh, it just makes a lot of sense here because as we just in our groups that we've been doing it, so much of it is about becoming intimate with the sky, the beingness, the background, the self, right? Intimate as the with these qualities or as these qualities, and they're lovely, right? Hey, acceptance, love, spaciousness, care, flow, even when this causeless okayness, this peace, this openness, this sense of unity, these things. We like these things. They really feel good. This is why that, this is there's sometimes there's a bliss that comes in this big love and all that. It's like, hey, I like this. And then we talk about the parts that they can obscure this. They can obscure. It's like they can obscure the sky. It's like and then especially when they blend with us, and then we become identified with the sense of the lack, the wanting, or the sense of I did something wrong, or I'm not doing this well enough. And those the sensations, those experiences can be painful, right? And then we have that in contrast to the love, the openness, the flow, the ease, the causeless okayness. I want the causeless okayness. I want the peace. And so we get these parts that come up that get pretty smart. These are great, these really smart parts, right? The parts that are like, hey, I know how to do this. Wait, there's self and parts. And we just want to be in these parts. We want to be in self. And these parts that are getting in our way, we just want to push those away and have them just go away. We want to be here instead of here. And it just makes sense.
Hmm. Right. New parts emerge. As I'm watching this happen in the groups and in my own experience, like it's so, like you said, so they're so smart and intricate how like a new part will emerge to try to either solve or get away from all the other parts, because it says like, oh, we can find this self thing. And it always becomes, I guess, when you're in parts, or even a that new part that feels like self, it's always just a look-alike, but it's not the real
Mm.
thing.
This is why one of the reasons we're really playing, ultimately we're going for this simultaneous awareness because It's like, what does it look like when everything's included, when all the parts are included, when all of life is included? And it's like the knowing both the beingness, the self, and the parts. And then it gets really wicked, wild, and fun when, because so much of this is like unblending from the parts and like having space from them and being awareness of them. But eventually it gets to all come back together where we get to be both the part, fully the parts and fully the self in this
Mhm.
simultaneous awareness. Where are we going next, Eli? Where are we going?
So still on this idea of something that actually wants to, let's say, fix, like, do the parts unburdened slash exiled get integrated without doing anything, without, I think that, like, you talk about like finding the longing here or sitting in the hot tub, like the latter feels a little more effortless. Like, how do you think about the actual, I guess, the updating of the system when we're either not doing something or looking for the fulfillment?
Great, great. That's the difference. Must have been, I don't know, maybe 5 years old at a haunted house. And I was like walking through with my dad, and I was terrified. I was really scared. But then I remember my dad's hand, and suddenly everything changed. Wow, dad's really here. And there was a sense of there's okayness here in the midst of all of these scary things jumping out. And that seems to be what happens as our parts become more aware of the presence of self. And this is what Dick Schwartz calls the spontaneous unburdening that happens.
Mm,
And it's the same way. In classic IFS, it's this gorgeous shamanic process of unburdening and returning the burdens to the elements of nature. And we do it differently, but it's really the same. And it's just as the parts, perhaps they get to soak in it. And this is, this is the third view of just soaking in self or being, the sense of the both. Or like you said, the other aspect of the third view is we begin hearing what the parts are longing for, and something starts to recognize that what's being longed for is a quality of self, is the peace and acceptance and okayness, and they start to find that. And as that begins being found in the system, it's like, hey, I got my dad's hand. And even the even sense of wow, safety is even here. Okayness is here, flow is here. And then it starts to relax, and that's when the unburdening just, it's just that's the gradual spontaneous unburdening that occurs.
mhm, mhm. On the part of the finding a longing, you mentioned safety, and I find that to be a common longing. Like, how do you, so say there's a part, like, I don't want to get too jargony about like non-dual and like time, but like a lot of lack of safety hinges on time, right? And so if you were to tell the part like, oh, right now, are you safe? Maybe there's another part that says yes, but I haven't fixed the root of the thing in the future. This is only going to come back, or this is,
Yeah.
or something like I can't control the future, plain and simple. How can you say I'm
Yes.
safe, right? Like, this is a part speaking.
Great. Well, and we don't want to do the spiritual bypassing. There's a
Mm-hmm.
way, like, Eckhart Tolle will say, if you're in the now, there's no problem. If you're
Mm-hmm.
really fully present in the now, and and whatever that means to us. But there's a sense of we can all find one way or another. We go in nature and we're just all in this, or we're in love with our partner, or we have these moments where there's everything's okay. But then just like you're saying, a part's like, great, yeah, or you're in a workshop, but later tomorrow when like you have to pay the bills or something, this is going to be here. It's still going to be here. And so there's this, that's the, it's like, I think I call that like what remains. And it's like, it's just, but it's almost like this. It's like if you, my sister-in-law, we used to work with homeless people. She used to, and there's a sense of when you're out on the streets, she's out there and she sees there's a bunch of kids and she's able to help 10 kids come in and find a place to sleep out of the freezing temperature. But then you see other kids that are still out there, and it's like that with our parts. You don't want to be like, well, I can find okayness here. I can find everything on one level, everything's okay. But you got kids out there in the cold. And so it just keeps welcoming. And so the idea is that perhaps even both, that there can be Eckhart's now, there can be the okayness, and at the same time, the nature is to just love these aspects of us and invite them in.
Mhm. So if I'm understanding correctly, it's like it's again, it moves a lot to the simultaneous awareness. Is like there is safety here, and there's also fear about the future.
Okay, so the fear about the future is a part,
Right, right. And what I'm
right?
saying, we're allowing that part to be there too, while there's safety here.
Absolutely. And that fear never infects the beingness, right? It
Hmm.
never tarnishes, it doesn't touch the beings. But the fear of that, it informs, that there's a sense of that it's all heard, but that welcomes everyone home. That is like that the fear that's like, yeah, this is great, but what about tomorrow? Remember, we still have this. Sid, remember those that bad thing still happened to you in seventh grade, and it's still there, and you still have a fear of ducks, and it's like those things are still here. I'm wondering what that's going to be. It's like, okay, oh, Sid, the guy who's scared of ducks. Anyway, but it's it's like that's still here, and it's just like, yeah, that's where we never, like Byron Katie, she used to get so excited when if she could touch even a little bit of stress in her system. The system would get excited, but stress isn't self. It's not being. This is the part, right? There's no stress or anxiety in what we in this tree in this nature and self. That's a part, and she gets excited. It's like, oh, wow, there's something else to welcome home that I hadn't seen, and that's where it seems to go. It just welcome it all.
I want to touch on a few of the things in the back half of the tipping points. Those are a little bit, feel like harder to grasp experientially. One of them being like finding fulfillment here, which we touched on a little bit. The other being parts as self, which seems very, very, very juicy. Um, yeah, like all as parts, and then also, I think this is a little bit easier or a little bit more obvious to me is like the innocence of parts eventually when you kind of let
Mm,
them be as much as possible. But maybe we'll
uh,
focus on those the first two, like the fulfillment here. I find sometimes that it's like hard, like it's like, oh, I don't actually feel the safety right now.
right.
Um, and then also like all is self.
E, Okay. Oh, we start hearing when parts come up, say, I don't like this. I don't want to do this. I want to bleed. Whenever we hear that, the resistance, or we hear a want, or it could be very sweet. I want to get a new car, or gosh, I really want my relationship to be better. I want to be a better. partner or whatever it is from the part, however life is expressing in us as parts or expressing, we start to hear what's being longed for, what's really being wanted. Start to hear that, and as we kind of really sink into that, we find that we can find like a quality of beingness is being longed for, like flow, ease, okayness, or that your word safety, and or love, to be seen, be welcomed, appreciation, connection. And so as we hear, that's what we call the sixth tipping point. It's just the hearing of it. It's just an opening up. And it's also kind of applying some of something called nonviolent communication. It's the heart of something called nonviolent communication. It's just really just, but it's just really simple. It's just hearing what's being longed for. And in a way, this is such an intimacy with the parts, because you can tell the whole story about everything. But this is like you're sitting on Santa Claus's, a kid sitting on Santa Claus's lap and it's telling the story. Oh, my mom did this, and I really like this and this and this and this. But Santa Claus is just hearing, what is it that's going to make this kid happy? What is it really wanting, right? Let's say, and that's what we're hearing with playing Santa Claus with, for our parts. What is it that they're really wanting? So we hear that as the sixth tipping point. The seventh is we just inquire, what's most like that which is here now? What's most like that that's here now? And safety, there's a sense with these qualities that they blossom and deepen in time. And it's like safety is one of those where safety is like freedom, and some of these really ones that they take a while to really know, and to really get to, for the system to really know it. And so the sense of when we hear what's being longed for, and it's like, no, I just want to be safe. It's like, what's most like that right now that's here? And we feel into that. And that might be, it might be being heard. It might be being heard that gives it some safety. It might be there's a sense of some acceptance. It might be some connectedness. It might be a sense of safety in, there's a flow and ease, a sense of like what the athletes and artists do, the flow. It's like it could be, we find out what's here in our system. This is the real fun of it, because we're just getting to know the qualities of beingness, and the parts are bringing us home to being. The parts in their want are bringing us here. How's that?
That's great. I think the point about something that's similar is helpful, because I think I was thinking about it as something that is like exactly, and maybe that's not always there or obvious. I guess it may always be there, but it may not always be apparent to the system. And then the last one, or one of the last ones, like all is self. How does that? How do you kind of help people to that, or how have you seen that progression yourself?
That's a tricky one, right? Because I prefer starting with how we all know this. And we're just saying that kind of like our parts aren't inseparable from this, or nothing is inseparable from beingness and self. And how do we know this? Like we've all touched it in, let's say, beauty. What is beauty? What's moments of beauty? The sunset in nature. Like we can, if we're really into that, like what is that beauty? And there's a sense of a oneness, a connectedness is there in beauty. What is it when we see a newborn and there's just such love here, and suddenly we look around and all we see is love, or when we are falling in love with someone, it's just all love. And so we've tasted this, we've tasted it. And what seems to open is, as we become more intimate, as there's more intimacy with the parts, we something seems to happen. It seems to be pretty consistent in this journey, where there's a sense of like the parts become, they're less separate from self. And then we start seeing, wow, there's a flavor of self or beingness in the parts themselves, or there's a connectedness that's always here. But I really prefer your last question is one of my favorite ways of getting there. And you asked me about that, which is, it's the 10th tipping point. It's like seeing the innocence and beauty in the parts.
Mm.
And which is really fun because we start with these views, and we have 5 views, as you know, in effortless IFS, and you might be the first one. It's like, because the fifth one, it seems like it's a lot more difficult, like it goes chronological, but maybe it doesn't. Like the first one is like celebrating the parts. That's it, like recognizing the parts and celebrating them and seeing, how we can. But that takes a lot to be able to really celebrate what's coming up in us, because they're the ones that obscure at one point in the journey. They are the ones that obscure the sky and obscure this. But then this is where it becomes really fun, and this is why in the groups I'm really inviting us all to see if we can find fascination with each other's systems, see if we can find fascination and with the parts as they arise in each other, because it can be a lot easier to see the innocence in the parts of others and seeing them in ourselves. And it's really, and this again takes me to Dick Schwartz as the model. Like this is what happens in his system, the innocence. He's just in love with them, right? And if we can see the innocence of our parts, it's what is what the innocence, it really does connect. There's something that connects them to self in that, because there's a transparent, we're starting to see in the innocence, it's almost like a transparency opens up in the part self. We start seeing the beingness, the self shining through. How am I doing? How are we doing?
Right. I love that the clip you put from Goodwill Hunting about the innocence of parts. It's such a good one. I think the movie clips are actually a very helpful way to see the different parts that you laid out, or different parts of the process.
Do you want to say something? Do you want to say anything more about like Goodwill Hunting with the innocence of the parts?
Yeah, I think it's very relatable, probably to many people. But I'll speak for myself to have these externally harmful parts, or parts that are like pathologized, and to then kind of take a 180 and see the complete innocence of it is like such a, like you can see his relief in the scene where he just bursts out. And it's
Yeah.
almost like maybe that's not him, that's actually like the part responding, like it's the child responding to like, wow, my whole life I was, being shamed or yelled at for being this part or
Yes.
being this way. And someone is seeing me, someone is loving me, supporting me, like letting me be. And it's just like such a good, yeah, it's such a good scene that captures so much of this model, or is
Yes.
so relevant.
Yes. Robin Williams to Matt Damon. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. Stop it. Not you. What you did.
Right,
Not your fault.
right.
This is this is one. Okay. I know I'm also wanting to be very aware of your time, and see, because we for today, like I think we're kind of coming to a close, and we had said an hour. And let me just add to this. Like I love that scene. I love that scene. And there is, oh, what's it called? There's a word. This is that we talk about qualities of self as some are more subtle and difficult to find. What's it called in the Catholic religion when you go to confession and you become, it's the, gosh, when you confess, you become absolution. Absolution. And this is going really deep in this journey, but some of us find that to be a quality of beingness. Absolution. Robin Williams, it's not your fault. Not your
Mm-hmm.
fault. All there is, and it's like you see, all there is innocence. And this is where IFS is brilliant. Dick Schwartz with this work because he helped us so many ways to find that he had these legacy and cultural burdens, and it's like we can see they're not ours, and then it's just to start to help us find our way here, find our way back to to self, which some of us sometimes I just use three words for it. It's like peace, love, and fulfillment. And it's what they're yeah.
Mhm.
How are we doing? Because I want to make this like meaningful and fulfilling and fun for you today. How are we doing? Anything like to close, to move towards closure? Is there anything final, or are we there? Is it Robin and Matt Damon closing it for us? How are we doing?
That's a good close, but definitely a lot of good insights, a lot of good clarification, and really appreciate the conversation.